What I'd like to do on this video is to present, and I've already done quite a bit of this in previous videos where I've dealt with the different viewpoints of the millennium in theology, especially the amillennial and the premillennial point of view. What I'd like to do is to say I would like to give a fair hearing of both positions and how their adherents would argue for them. And my conclusion is that we should not be super dogmatic on any one of them. I'm 79 years of age. I remember going through life in my academic training and teaching, and there was this constant debate about which position was biblical or correct. And godly people have differed over the century. And I'm talking about people who are conservative theologically, who truly believe in the full inerrancy of the scriptures, but yet they read the chronology of eschatology somewhat differently. And it's my own thinking that we need to hear both sides, but then also conclude by saying, and this is more of a fireside chat. I used to do this with churches that we pastored. We'd have fireside chats. Why take one position and say, if you don't hold to this position, you cannot pastor in our church, you cannot teach in our schools, you cannot really be in our denomination? Why? Especially when Jesus prayed that the world would know that we are one, and by our love, and we don't necessarily have to agree on theology at every point, but we need to be fair and say both sides have their arguments. So why make it a central issue? All Christians who are conservative agree on one thing, and that is Jesus Christ is coming back someday. And there will be a resurrection to life or to the opposite, apart from Jesus Christ. And then there will be an eternal kingdom, a new heaven and new earth. Every Christian denomination that's conservative theologically would agree with that. But where they differ is in the chronology. Is there no millennium, or is there 1,000-year reign of Christ prior to the new heaven and new earth? What I'd like to do is just summarize the strong arguments on both sides and conclude by saying I'm not sure that we can be super dogmatic on the exact chronology at all. Let me start with the amillennial position. The amillennial position teaches that there is no literal 1,000-year reign of Christ, that Jesus is coming back, and when he comes back, there will be a final general resurrection and a final general judgment. And postmillennialism and amillennialism both would agree on that. The difference in premillennialism, those who hold that position believe that Christ will come back, but there will be 1,000 years of his reign on the earth prior to the new heaven and new earth. So just a quick resume. I've gone into this in more detail in other videos, but let me just say this. First of all, in the amillennial argument, the biggest weighty argument, I think, is in Matthew 13 and Matthew 25, the judgment of the wheat and the tares in 13, picturing what in many would feel a final judgment, a separation of the tares from the wheat, and followed by the kingdom of Christ, the eternal kingdom. The same with the sheep and the goats. The Lord comes with his angels, and there is this final separation of sheep from goats. And then Jesus' own teaching that all who sleep in the dust of the earth shall arise, some to everlasting life and some to shame and everlasting contempt. In other words, we have that in Daniel 12, but Jesus said, all are going to hear my voice and come forth. And they who have done good unto everlasting life, they who have done evil unto everlasting judgment. I don't think that means that one is saved by good works. I've often told students, if there's fire in the fireplace, there should be smoke coming out of the chimney. That is, I think he's looking at the life that shows the reality or non-reality of one's faith. So we have what appears to be a general resurrection and a general judgment in those passages just quoted. Then those who go from that position to Revelation chapter 20, where we have the 1,000 years talked about. It talks about how I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given to them, and I saw the souls of they that were beheaded on account of the witness of Jesus and on account of the word of God, who did not worship the beast, nor his image, nor received the mark upon the forehead or upon the hand. And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The Greek word here is etseson. They lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not live, did not etseson, very same aorist indicative active third person plural from Sao, did not live until the 1,000 years was completed. And it reads, this is the first resurrection. Now the amillennial position would say, this does not have to be a future literal resurrection of some, and then later another resurrection, but they would quote a passage like, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he zao, yet shall he live. And they would say that the martyrs are now living and reigning with Christ, and would appeal to the seals and how the martyrs are robed in what we call victory robes. So they would follow the viewpoint that the 1,000 years is a symbol of Christ's reign from his resurrection to the second advent, and the martyrs reigning with him. And they would argue and say that let's interpret Revelation 20 by the clear account of the Gospels, the one general harvest time, the one general sheep and goat judgment, and so forth. That would be, I think, their main argument. And they would also say, let us interpret the New Testament or the Old Testament by the New, rather than vice versa, looking at progressive revelation. And those who hold that position, not all of them would say that there's not a future for Israel, because Paul did say that all Israel would be saved in Romans 11. Some would say that the eternal kingdom that is to come would come also at the return of Christ, and the promises of the Old Testament would not be totally, let's say, fulfilled spiritually, but in a new heaven and new earth. And they would also say that basically Jesus interpreted many times in a somewhat of a symbolic way. He said, not on this mountain or on this mountain, but in spirit and in truth, we worship the Lord. And so the point that is made there is that you could still even hold to a literal fulfillment of land promises in the Hebrew Bible, but apply it to the eternal state of a new heaven and new earth where those promises would be actualized or realized. Now, in terms of the premillennial position, the premillennial position believes that this text in John 20 is key. That is, we're talking about two resurrections. The resurrection of the martyrs, that they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. And the word used again is etse son, aorist indicative active, third person plural, from Saul. The rest of the dead did not, etse son, lived not till the 1,000 years was finished. So a premillennial interpreter like Alford, Alford, would say, if we don't take these two verbs to mean the same thing, then we've lost exegesis completely. Right back to back that way. So his argument, which is a strong argument, that we're looking at two physical resurrections. The resurrection of martyrs, and then the rest of the dead. And I think many also would put the church in that first resurrection with the martyrs. And then after the millennium, the final resurrection of all dead. And so this would be Alford's argument about the importance of seeing both as literal resurrections. A person like Hodge took issue with that. He was a postmillennialist who said, well, let's interpret that text, which is more apocalyptic, by the clear text in the Gospels. But yet, the premillennial strength would be the text is still there, and it seems to clearly be talking about two bodily resurrections of the martyrs and of the rest of the dead. So in light of that, how would a premillennial interpreter treat the harvest scene or the parable of Matthew 13 and the sheep and the goats of Matthew 25? I think they would probably say something like this. What we have here is a summary, not a precise detailing of every event second by second, but more of a telescope summary. And an argument that they might use for that would be Jesus made similar statements, like when he said, Moses, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Now we have two lifting ups. We have lifting up on the cross, followed by the lifting up in the ascension of Christ. Or, if I be lifted up, I will draw all the world to me. And that's still going on. In other words, he was lifted up on the cross, lifted up into glory, and yet he's still drawing all the world unto him. It didn't happen in that precise moment where he was lifted up on the cross, or in, if we have a double entendre there, or in the resurrection and ascension. So that would be one argument that the premillennial interpreter might be able to use or could use, showing that we're looking at a summary, at a telescoping in the teaching of Jesus. The same could be seen in where he says, now is the Son of Man glorified, in John chapter 13, when Judas went out to betray him. Glorification is there, but that's not the end of glorification. Christ also prays in 17 of John, glorify me, Father, with the glory that I had with you from all eternity. So there is a process, there is a summarizing, if I could put it that way, of the idea of glorification. It's not just in one moment and so forth. So those who try to deal with some of these texts in Matthew, for example, or John, would say, why can't Jesus be speaking in the same way? That when the Lord comes back with his angels That's the beginning point. And there is the separation of wheat from tares. And then telescoping it into the end, where there will be a resurrection to life and a resurrection to death, and so forth. So, at any rate, my point is that even looking at those two texts, the text of the harvest time, the harvest time can be more of a summary of what starts when Jesus Christ returns. Same way with the sheep and the goats. So I'm thinking the premillennial response, if one was making a response to the amillennial argument that these are texts that conclusively prove that there can't be a millennium, could be answered that way. So, in light of all of this, what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that let's not, my own thinking, let's not be dogmatic on whether one is amillennial, postmillennial, or premillennial. I don't think Jesus even laid that out when the apostles asked him, "Will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel?" in the book of Acts. He didn't deny that there was a future kingdom, but he said, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons. Basically, what you are to do is start in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the othermost part of the earth. So uh, I'm thinking even Jesus says, you're not going to be able to put all of this exact chronology together. So why have we tried all these years to put it together rather than saying what we put together is the agreement that Christ is coming back. There will be resurrection of righteous and unrighteous, and there will be final judgment and eternity. And let that be really what we would call the cardinal truth of the second coming. The other details, I don't think we have to say yay or nay. We can say whatever viewpoint one is comfortable with, but don't make it, in my own thinking, an ironclad doctrinal conclusion that if one does not believe it, one could not be part of a particular denomination or uh, teach in certain schools. I even thought, I've used this in one video, Calvin and Luther, who were amillennial, would not be able to teach in some premillennial schools today. Now, it doesn't make sense to me. So what I'm trying to say is, let us go as far as the scriptures go, but let us realize that we're in the waters of hermeneutics, where godly people differ, and the Lord didn't give a detailed, clear, can I say, presentation like he did, I believe, about his second coming, the final, let's say, resurrection of everyone in a new heaven and new earth. And just leave it there and not try to say you have to come to this side, you have to be amillennial, or you have to be premillennial. And that's sort of what I wanted to say in this fireside chat. Thank you.
I like that.